Hello, and welcome to my YouTube stream post Sargon. And I'm streaming today. My name is Brenton Lengel. I'm a poet, playwright, comic author, and I guess political interlocutor. And I just finished a debate with Sargon of Akkad, so I'm joined with some colleagues of mine, Mouthy Infidel and Bobby B. Mouthy, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. I'm Mouthy Infidel. I'm just a Marxist, communist YouTuber. I do a lot of debates and stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Bob, you want to introduce yourself and
Yeah,
plug
sure.
your podcast?
Outstanding. Yeah, I'm Bob, Mustache Bob on Twitter. I'm the co-host of the 5x5 podcast on SoundCloud. We're also going to switch over to YouTube, I think, eventually, because it's probably the easier platform to use. I'm pretty radically to the left of mainstream American politics. I enjoy discourse. I do public debates when I can, and we're just starting up. So if you can get on the ground floor being a fan of our content.
Yeah, definitely check them out. And those of you who are wondering, like, where I fall, I am an anarchist. Most interest, like a left anarchist, classical anarchist, most interested in the ANCOM sort of Catalan anarchist tradition, though I am open to, I try to be very non-dogmatic about it. I don't really consider myself a leftist per se, though I tend to agree with the left more than the right, especially these days, because have you seen the right? But I try to straddle that line. Don't put me in a box, man.
I just watched like an hour long of you discussing with somebody on the failed right. So yeah, no, I can see what it looks like.
Absolutely, yeah. The failed right. Who is that? Oh, was that oh shoot, can't remember who I was talking to, but yeah, you can bring that up later. But yeah, so I just finished my debate with Sargon of Akkad, and we're going to sort of talk about that and see where the conversation leads us. So first off, guys, what were your reactions to the debate? How do you think I did? And you feel free to say anything. If you think I sucked and need to stop, please, by all means, tell me.
Do you want to go first, Mouthy, or do you want me to?
Either way is fine with me.
Okay. I thought it was super funny that I this isn't really my wheelhouse, trans issues, although I'm obviously in favor of trans rights. The thing that I found really funny was that he literally used the Wikipedia examples of trans athletes because I did a little wiki dive before I listened to this just to refresh myself, and like he used the first 3 trans women athletes in Wikipedia.
Which means he then just searched trans women athletes on Google and just...
I would be shocked.
Yes, the Sargon research method.
Yeah, dude. I'm not super familiar with this guy. I saw some of his stuff in like 2014 when I was in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And
oh, you were in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I was in Afghanistan in 2014, and like I saw that, and I'm like, oh my God, what's going on in America? And I called somebody up to ask them, and they're like, no, that guy's full of shit. so that's like my introduction to him.
You're over in Afghanistan. Were you military or were you just...
Yeah. I was deployed military at the time.
I love that. Fighting Taliban.
Yeah, I'm sitting in like, you know, my barracks watching YouTube, and his shit pops up, and I'm like, oh my God, are they like rioting in the colleges or something? So I had to ask a friend, and they're like, no, that guy's full of shit. And you know, like, thank God I had someone to like kind of pull me off that precipice. It's also funny. Because I did another little wiki thing, because I'm not really super familiar with the Akkadian Empire. But if you go on the wiki, one of the first quotes they have about the historical Sargon, whom he picked as his avatar, is that his mother was a changeling. so he's arguing against trans rights with the avatar of this bro whose mother was allegedly a changeling.
Oh my gosh! And a changeling is in she was trans in some way.
There's so many different like changeling myths. I can't say for sure. It's funny.
That's really funny. Also, the mask that he uses is not Sargon. It's grandson.
Yeah. No, of course not. And you know, as a lefty bro who likes to smoke cigars, which I'm doing right now, don't smoke, kids. It kills me that people on the failed right ruin my tobacco.
So Mouthy, what did you think?
I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was kind of weird at the beginning when you brought up that meta-analysis, or the systemic review of the literature or whatever, and his response was like, well, you can say there's no evidence that, trans women would have an advantage, but the outcomes shows that they do. When the meta-analysis in part definitely was examining the outcomes. I'm not sure what that meant or what he thought that meta-analysis was entailed, but I thought that part was kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of expected something like that because I saw in his debate with Vaush, Vaush gave him a study that happened to come from UCLA, and he was like, well, it's from California, so it's wrong.
Oh, yeah, that was hilarious. Yeah.
So I expected something like that. What surprised me, actually, and where I think I might have been able to do a bit better on here, was I didn't expect him because, I did my opening statement, and we do our opening statements ahead of time, so I wasn't too surprised that his opening statement didn't address anything in mine, but then he didn't address any of my arguments, and just kind of pulled the direction in a very different way to go, which that was an interesting tactic of not having the debate itself.
Yeah.
He kind of relies, and again, I don't consume a lot of his media for my own sanity, but he seems to kind of rely on the principle of having a British accent makes people think you're smart.
Yeah.
Because he cited a bunch of stuff that didn't really follow from his arguments. His analysis of Bertrand Russell's theory of language was maybe a freshman level analysis of that, at
True.
best. His definition at the end of intersectionality was completely incorrect.
Yeah.
He constantly cited science without actually specifically citing science, which you went out of your way to cite a bunch of very specific data points and studies, and he says no, the science
Says something else.
Paper. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I liked how I did like how Sargon would appeal to the science being on his side when his evidence for trans people having an advantage is a bunch of anecdotes that he found on Wikipedia.
Yeah, and that was really frustrating, I think, because also, there are people that will just say that, and it surprises me. It's kind of like that thing where they found that a lot of people, when you confront them with information that is contrary to their worldview, will just ignore it and believe more strongly in their worldview oftentimes.
Mm-hmm. Which is where he could benefit from actually reading some critical theory.
Yeah, that would be great. Maybe we can get Sargon to read critical theory.
I mean, I think he would actually like Adorno because of the hard reaction against popular culture, mm-hmm. and you could sneak it in on him like that. He also tried to cite Jordan Peterson at one point, but he didn't finish his thought, so I was wondering where he was going to go with that.
I was wondering where he was going to go with that too. We got a little sidetracked a few times, though. I did also feel that even though it went off the topic of trans women in sports, which kind of proved my point that he didn't really care about sports. What he was interested in was sort of the culture war aspect of it. But I felt that we did get some good discussion done just basically on talking about the philosophy of what is a man, what is a woman. And, he clearly does define men and women in this very biological, or not even biological, I would say, reproductive essentialist sort of way.
Reproductive essentialist sort of way that's also very much bound up in traditional quote unquote Western thought. Not even Western thought, because there's been things that go against the criteria he was using in Western thought. It's a very reactionary definition of what is a man and what is a woman for him. And it's he'll
use whatever definition allows him to invalidate trans people, I think.
I think you're right. And the other thing is it's
unfortunate.
I'm assuming you guys and probably whoever's going out of their way to listen to this are familiar with Umberto Eco's 14 characteristics of fascism.
I am, yeah.
And it's almost like tradition just for tradition's sake.
Right.
And the obsession with a plot, because there's the enemy that's weak and strong at the same time. There's these trans people that are going to overrun your sports, and they're plotting against you.
But they can also
just, but they're also weak and they can just be banned. It's very weird, psychologically, the psychology of somebody like him is more interesting to me than his actual arguments, frankly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I will say, I don't think, based upon this conversation, this is the first time I've talked to him, and I don't think he necessarily acts in as bad faith as some people think that he does. And I'm not actually convinced he's fash, though I definitely think there's some reactionary tendencies there.
Yeah, I don't think he didn't make any fascist art. He didn't say you have to put the transes in a camp or anything like that. So it's
There's
just
someone in the comments referring to me engaging in Talmudic reasoning.
Really?
Yeah.
Very big brained. Yeah. No, I do. Didn't Sargon like advocate ethno-nationalism in his debate with Vosh though?
He did, but also Vaush kind of pushed him into it, I think. I will so what he talked about, like sort of his idea, if I recall, and I would need to go back and look at it. I think he does definitely think of nations as being a specific ethnicity, but it also doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be entirely consistent. Like I didn't notice a huge amount of overt racism in the way he tried to talk about it, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, no, I get what you mean. I do think I do have to like consider a lot of the times when I'm listening to people like Sargon, like, do I think this person's like deliberately like a hateful person trying to spread hateful views, or is this person just like kind of dumb and like hasn't really thought through it very far?
Yeah, and honestly, I wouldn't say this is interesting because he reacted really well to the debate and was actually like very gracious afterwards, and we ended in a pretty good place. Like I sent him some fun karate videos, which that's a first for me in a debate.
Well, yeah, like he does. I think he does this a lot too, and he didn't lose his temper, which is actually very surprising for a righty, and.
Yeah, Jay, he didn't try to tell me that I was going to die, and like JF did. But then again, I also didn't go after him like I went after JF.
No, he didn't. He didn't really make a coherent enough argument for you to do that. Unfortunately,
I hate to say it, but I agree with you on that.
Like I think it was brilliant that you brought up combat sports, because the great thing about combat sports for the uninitiated is that. It is actually organized based on physical characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
So
class is huge.
Yeah, weight class. Like I'm an old boxing guy. Put them up, fisticuffs. But like the great thing about boxing is that there's theoretically a place for everybody. There's a place for the 115-pound person, and there's a place for the 200-pound person to hit somebody like a Mack truck. And like he kind of ignored that classification. You brought it up towards the end of having a classification based on those characteristics, and he just kind of ignored it and stuck with his male-female thing, because there's a lot of different ways that you can approach this issue that aren't just excluding trans people from activity.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's one of the points that I was thinking about, was like, if trans people have certain physical characteristics or certain advantages in certain aspects of their physique that like make it unfair for them to compete, well, what you have to think about is there's undoubtedly going to be cis people who also have advantages in those specific physical aspects. So wouldn't it make more sense to like create certain divisions based on different, levels of those different physical attributes, rather than just like excluding trans people wholesale? Like that would seem to make more sense, even from just the standpoint of fairness.
Exactly. And like,
I would agree. Sorry, if you ever want to keep going, Bobby.
I'm sorry, but if you ever want to see an example of that, you can see it for free on YouTube. It's posted. Just watch Vitaly Klitschko fight Tomasz Adamek back in like 2012. This like 6'8" Ukrainian and like a 6 foot even Polish guy are in the same boxing weight class division, and Vitaly Klitschko just demolishes this guy. And they bring up that the trans MMA athlete who just demolishes all of the opponents that she got into. I've seen dudes crack other dudes' skulls in regular boxing. That happens. It's rare, but it happens.
Well, it's like I said in the debate. It's only 15 pounds of pressure per square inch. It's not actually that difficult to crack a skull. To break a nose, it's about 5 pounds of pressure per square inch. That is the ability to break one pine board. Yeah. That's the power needed. So if you can punch through 3 pine boards, you can crack a skull if you hit in the right way at the right time at the right angle.
Yeah, boards don't hit back.
Yeah, no, they don't. Sorry, I'm getting too into martial arts here.
I'll go off on it for like an hour if you don't stop.
My dojo actually, and you can see this because I trained with Ken Wakan in New York City, and they're amazing. One of the black belts in there, who I have been wanting to kick him. I'm going to kick him in the head one of these days. Yeah, one of my senpais, while I was waiting for him to notice me, he at the we will do like seminars and demonstrations like on International Women's Day and stuff. And one of the things that he did on it was he broke 300 pounds of ice with a hammer blow, just bang and down. And so like I really feel like, like with Fallon Fox, and everybody's like, oh, Fallon Fox cracked this woman's skull. I mean, it sounds awful. It makes you go, but like it's really not uncommon in that kind of sport like MMA.
Right, and you have a ingrained social response to somebody that's classified as a male hitting somebody that's classified as a female. Just a natural reaction that's just taught to you from birth in our cultural standpoint. So,
yeah, absolutely. Hang on, I got to send a text. Mouthy, do you want to get in on this?
Yeah, I mean, in a discussion about MMA, I'm pretty much less than useless. But there was one point, like if it's cool if I just sort of like change the
Please,
sort
by
of
all
tangent.
means.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things was that I meant to tell you this before the debate, but it completely slipped my mind, was that maybe one of the ways that I like to approach the should trans people allowed to be in sports debate is like there's sort of a lack of data regarding like, I mean, not totally, but to some extent there's a lack of data regarding like people who've, went through puberty as a trans person or as a, a cis person and or a cis male and is now taking cross-sex hormones. There's like to some extent a lack of data regarding like how fair that is. I mean, or like how level the playing field is in that case. But I've never really heard a convincing argument that somebody who, was taking puberty blockers and never went through the puberty, never went through male puberty. Like I've never heard an argument that someone who never went through male puberty. Sorry.
It has those advantages, which is true.
Yeah.
If they don't go through puberty, there's virtually no difference.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because like if you look at sports statistics, before puberty, there's basically no difference between girls and boys. All the athletic differences between girls and boys seem to emerge like post-puberty. So there's not really any convincing argument there. And then if the argument gets, flipped to an argument about puberty blockers, then that's pretty much just like that's not really an argument. Like the scientific consensus is overwhelmingly clear about, the efficacy of puberty blockers or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Now, and it's funny because they don't want people to do the puberty blockers.
Right.
Like he was arguing with Vaush about that. So it's like kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yeah. Like puberty blockers should solve the whole issue, but.
Well, I think what people like him don't realize is, I put this in my notes as I was listening to this whole thing, is that like change over time in our ideas about gender identity and gender theory, it doesn't mean abolition of like gender. It doesn't mean that you can't be a cis male. I'm cis male as hell, and the existence of trans people doesn't invalidate me, and it doesn't invalidate men's and women's sports. It doesn't.
It's just, you don't suddenly not know how to have a baby or something.
Yeah, exactly. And our ideas about gender are relatively new, historically speaking, that we have today. And they're changing like they change a lot in history. It's just very weird to see somebody kind of, to use the old analogy, to stand astride history and say this far and no further.
Yeah.
And
right.
You're not going to get a great argument out of that. I don't think in any scenario.
I will agree on that, and I have a theory that actually goes back to my Buddhism. But before I kind of get into that, I did want to swing this over to Mouthy here, because Mouthy, both you and I have now debated Eric Stryker, and I think you actually did a better job than I did. So first off, hats off to you there.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
There are a lot of people who have been saying, like, I got some comments even from some friends who were mad at me for even doing this debate with Sargon. Now, one of the things that I really want to say is I don't think Sargon is like on the level of like JF or Stryker, because like I even checked with Daniel Harper of the I Don't Speak German podcast. He kind of keeps an angle on the far right, because I wanted to make sure that when I was talking to Sargon, if if he was a Nazi, I'd want to make sure that I knew about it. And what I got was that, he's got some reactionary opinions, but no, he's not one of those scumbags. But, do you feel like these kinds of debates are effective? What are your thoughts on debating people on the far right, be they somebody like Sargon or somebody like Stryker?
Yeah, well, of course, I don't think that Sargon is as bad as Stryker. I don't know if I could think of somebody who's as bad as Stryker. I mean, Stryker literally can't go 10 seconds without screaming racial slurs and Jewish conspiracies. It's honestly insane. But as far as debating the alt-right, I mean, it all depends on, how confident you are in your ability to successfully debate the alt-right. So for example, when I went on Eric Stryker's show, I think it was a year or so ago, maybe over a year ago. I think it was over a year ago at this point, but it was back when he had his show on YouTube called The People's Square. Mm-hmm. And he would go live and, just debate random people that he found on Twitter. And that's how I got on his show. I was tweeting at him, and then he was like, okay, I'll debate you on my show. And, in preparation for that debate, I heard Eric Stryker debate a lot of people who essentially didn't have the rhetorical ability or the research to really effectively combat anything he was saying. And so all I think those people debating Eric Stryker did was enforce the reactionary views of Eric Stryker's fan base, because now they just got to see, their Nazi daddy beat someone up on stream.
And my dad can beat up your dad.
Right, exactly, yeah. But when I think when it comes to people who have the research to debate these people and have the rhetorical ability, I think it can absolutely be a positive thing, right? I can't speak to your debate because I'm not sure what the fallout of that was or how people reacted to it, but I do know from my debate with Eric Stryker, there was a lot of people. And I was actually really surprised, because I expected the classic, you're a Jew and you were making up stats and stuff like that. But I mean, the fallout from Eric's community, or not the fallout, but the response from Eric's community was actually very positive. A lot of people were saying yeah, you actually did really well. I'll look into some of these things. Can you send me some of these studies you were referencing? And so I think me doing that undoubtedly was a net positive in the world, as far as making there be potentially less Nazis. So yeah, I think it can undoubtedly be a good thing. I think it can be a bad thing. It all just depends on how well you're able to do it.
Absolutely. After the fallout of the Stryker Enoch debate was interesting, because there were two aspects to it. There were the people the shit posters who wanted to come on and feel right, and they were trying to meme Caleb, if I remember right, and just kind of shitting all over the comments and the chat. And I engaged with a few of them that followed me over to my YouTube channel, and the ones that were a little more coherent I talked to, and then some of the others YouTube just auto banned a lot of the comments.
Right.
I'd see they'd send in comments, and I'd be like, oh, what's this comment? And I'd click on it and it wouldn't be anywhere, and I'm like, oh, YouTube grabbed it, because it was just garbage. So I've talked to a few of them. A couple of his fans have actually come around and come over to them to come back to the light to a certain extent. So I've maintained a little bit of friendship with some of these people on the way out, and I'm hoping that they can get a patient ear to speak to kind of see if they really want to be a part of this anymore or not. So, things were positive about it, and then things were also negative about it, because also, now Stryker and Enoch and JF are trying to get a foothold in modern day debate, I think. And that could be good or bad. I mean, Stryker and Alsup got utterly destroyed by Vaush and And even from what I've heard, I don't have proof of this yet. And if somebody can send it to me, that would be great. But from what I've heard, Enoch threw Stryker under the bus after that, and even he said like it was in one of their streams. So
I mean, well, I think Enoch and JF are a bit more well composed. But I will say, I think the more Eric Stryker debates publicly, the worse off the L-Right is. So I think that's probably a positive.
I mean, JF honestly in my opinion, JF's a paper tiger. He's not. Sure. But the thing about JF is that he has a degree that is impressive if you don't know anything about biology or science at that level. So it's why Destiny had trouble with him, because I think Destiny had a lot of respect for his degree, especially at first, and would tend to have a little bit of difficulty arguing with that, and so he would go after him on personal things. But as we saw in my debate with him after I showed his credentials and his papers to two different high up biologists, one was a neuroscientist and the other was a research biologist, they were just like, yeah, this dude has no idea what he's talking about and is not qualified for any of this.
Yeah.
But it turns out the calipers measuring the skull aren't the modern science setup.
Definitely not. It's a shame too, because I mean, JF is weird. I don't know if because in a lot of ways, like on paper, objectively a bad person, but also it just seems sometimes that things don't connect entirely. And I wonder if I read that there was a psychological evaluation where he was judged as being very smart but having very little insight, and I wonder if that led him to be in a position where he was going to be taken in by these ideas.
Well, I think part of the right wing appeal is that it appeals to a kind of a flaw that we have in a lot of our education now, where it doesn't necessarily train you to be insightful, like you were mentioning. It trains you to kind of fill out worksheets and
memorize facts.
And what the field right does a really good job of is teaching people a very simple epistemology for the universe, where it's A, B, and C, and there's no nuance and there's no subjectivity to it, and that's very appealing to somebody who's trained just to fill out a worksheet instead of really think insightfully about things. Mm. And I think it's a really good thing to go back to what you guys were saying a minute ago when you debate people on the alt-right, and I think Mouthy had a good point, is that you have to be really confident and know your shit, because one of the most important things about debating these people is to just crush them.
For sure.
Yeah.
I would agree. There's one mistake. I feel like I made a mistake in that I had the data there. But what I could have done to better prepare for this debate, in my opinion, now that I know in hindsight, now that I know the tactic that he was going to take, is I should have had the data of Olympic wins in as many categories as possible. And just when he made that claim that trans women are shattering all these records, I could go, oh, well, here's this record, here's this record, here's this record.
Well, what you could have done is even if you don't have any data, if he starts saying that, oh, look, this trans person did this and this trans person did this, just ask him if he has any, just point out the fact that he's literally doing an anecdotal evidence fallacy. Yeah. Anecdotal evidence doesn't get us anywhere, and ask him if he has any data. And if he doesn't have any data, the burden of proof is on him to prove his claim. And if he doesn't have any data besides a bunch of random anecdotes he found on Wikipedia to demonstrate what he's saying is correct, then, he hasn't made a good argument.
Absolutely. Well, and it's I sort of did that because I said he was nut picking essentially, because I know that Rationality Rules went after him about that, which is hilarious, because then there's a video where Sargon of Akkad is like, I'm gonna go pick my nuts.
Right.
But yeah, I should have hammered him a bit harder on that. That was the reason, by the way, why I worked anecdotal evidence into my opening statement. I didn't just give the paper that explained that they didn't have an advantage.
Right.
I gave the paper, and then I went into like on the micro level that people could understand why they didn't have advantage, and talked about the VO2 levels and the loss of muscle mass and the increase of weight. Now, I've noticed there's a lot of people, in the comments and in the chat that either didn't watch the video or just ignored that part and continue to advance the bullshit narrative because it makes them feel good. And, that's to be expected, I suppose. But I feel like if you can personalize something, it does a lot better of persuading the kind of person who isn't as interested or maybe doesn't understand data that well. Like, Mouthy, I'm curious as to your education. You're quite a bit younger than me. I mean, have you graduated yet?
No, actually.
Okay,
Almost,
so you're still in
but
college?
yeah. I have basically no education besides like going online and like illegally cracking like research papers on Sci-Hub and stuff.
Hell yeah. Absolutely, man.
You mean
It's
paying
anarchist as fuck.
you mean paying the fee and respectfully
yeah.
downloading because you love capitalism.
I misspoke. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I
I need to stimulate the economy. Yeah.
We're all good capitalists who love their mothers.
Sure.
Oh man, I don't know if you guys saw the debate that I had with the two capitalists last night, both of which were airing on, anarcho-capitalism on Friday. But Alex, the ANCAP that I brought in, who's very sharp, by the way. I really like that kid. Or guy, I guess. I don't think he's a kid anymore. He was a kid when we first started arguing years ago. But he pointed out, we were talking about co-ops, and apparently he works as a banker. And he's like, look, dude, just fake your co-op. If your co-op wants to get a loan from a bank, just fake it on the sheet and pretend like it's a normal, and the bank won't check. And I was just like, yes, good praxis. Thank you.
One issue I actually had with a point that you made was when you brought up breeding and he went down that whole sex rabbit hole.
That was a mistake.
You could have been a little more clear there because you were talking about selective breeding specifically, not just breeding. Because yes, you do have a natural instinct to breed. I mean, you'll figure it out. You can bring up Schopenhauer and all his weird hangups about that. But
I think you're right. That could have been stated better.
Yeah, but he just went down a weird rabbit hole where he even talked at the end about people who are obsessed with gay people usually have a little bit of issues with their sexuality internally. And he's just obsessing over trans women the whole time in that debate. I don't think he mentioned trans men one time. And from my personal experience with the military, I didn't serve with any trans people to my knowledge. But there's a lot of trans men who are willing to take on the increased PT standards of being a man, which is almost double what it is for a female. For me, when I was getting out, I had to do 40 push-ups in 2 minutes, 50 sit-ups in 2 minutes, and I had to run something like a 15-minute 2-mile, I think, to pass as like the floor. And for a woman my same age, it was like 20 push-ups and the same sit-ups, and then I think it was like almost a 20-minute 2-mile. And there are trans men who are trying to go into the military, and they are willing to meet that same PT standard. And there are trans men who are willing to compete in the men's division, which is something that didn't get really brought up, which is, according to people like Sargon, theoretically much more difficult. There's a trans man who's willing to compete against Michael Phelps, or a trans man who's willing to fight, Vladimir Vitaly Klitschko, who looked like Ivan Drago if he was a real person. I don't know if you guys follow boxing; those guys are ridiculous.
Well, I actually in the comments, because we sort of got into it in the comments, that I pointed out that there was just a major win by a trans male boxer over a cis male. And
really?
Yeah. It was in Rolling Stone. I'll find the article. But yeah, what's really weird was he looked at that and was like, yeah, but are there any Olympic records? And it seems like it's moving the goalposts a little bit, but it seems like he's really impressed by record breaking.
Well, and the other thing about that is that if you look at the women who are competing in just the women's divisions of sports now, they would crush male world records from like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So would it be unfair for those women to compete against those men? You know?
That's a really good point, and I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, I was thinking of that while I was trying to buy some tobacco to, ease my conscience, having to listen to an hour of Sargon of Akkad.
I'm sorry. Just
No,
think of it
it's
as
not.
you listening to an hour of me.
Yeah, I will.
Which is
I will.
probably just as bad.
No, no, it's not so bad, man. Like you've listened to my podcast, so I apologize.
Absolutely. It's a great podcast.
Mm.
So, yeah, you should have me on sometime, by the
Oh,
way. Not to put you on the spot, but
my co-host was on vacation this week, so if you get a little bit of time this week, let me know and we can record a little bit.
Yeah, it sounds like fun.
Yeah.
So, Mouthy, what you did a trans debate with CJ Cox and that other guy before this. That's when I reached out to you because and it was you and what's that other guy's name? I sent him a message.
It was Jangle's Science Lad.
Jangle's Science Lad. Yeah, you
sorry.
guys did really, really well in that debate, by the way.
Hey, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I feel like towards the end of the debate, like me and Sargon were pretty chummy, and we're pretty chummy afterwards, which I'm actually happy about because I feel like, if you get into a position like that where you can actually are more likely to have actual communication, I think it's a good idea to, reward good behavior when somebody does seem to be engaging in good faith as opposed to just trying to use the platform to slander people and spread hate speech. But for instance, that CJ guy he made my skin crawl with some of the shit he was saying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That debate was interesting because it was because I'm used to doing one-on-one debates. I've not done many 2v2 debates. But it was interesting debating two people where one of them was the archetypal dumb bad faith actor and the other one was actually clearly willing to learn and engage in good faith discussion. It was kind of interesting having both of those in one debate. But yeah, no, I agree. That guy was super bigoted, super not very good faith, not very well read on the research and so on.
I love that he was like, are you going to call me a bigot? Well, would you say I was bigoted to see if we would help, what was the term?
Schizophrenic people.
Yeah, schizophrenic. Yeah. And he's naming all these mental disorders. And I'm like, you realize what you're saying there, dude.
No, the fact that you're equating being trans with being schizophrenic is bigoted.
Don't you guys know anything other than a cis white man is literally genocide?
Yeah.
So I had a couple of thoughts here going out, and one of them is that I really think and this kind of goes back to my Buddhist faith because I'm a Buddhist with Soka Gakkai International, one of the things that's really important to understand in Buddhism is the concept of clinging. Essentially it's been translated as tanha. Tanha means thirst, desire. And essentially people seem to have this psychological problem across the board, whether you're a Buddhist or not, where we don't want things to change. We crave permanence in an impermanent universe where the one actual constant is change. And I'm really wondering if part of what pulls people into the far right is this sort of existential dread brought on by an inability to deal with change and then ultimately one's own morality.
Yeah.
Mortality. Sorry.
I'd say part of it too is the lack of control that you get in late neoliberal capitalism. If you're living in this country right now and your income is below, say, $100,000, for the sake of argument, you have very, very little control over the things that actually affect your life. And the far right really appeals to that desire for control because they're like, come follow us and we'll stop the plot that's about to infringe upon what little vestiges of control you have left. That's one of the reasons that you see it manifest a lot in the video gaming community, where it's the last little bastion of the straight white guy. Or I'm a Warhammer 40K fan for my sins, which is rough sometimes. That it's a great franchise, but you see a lot of that in that franchise because it's becoming broader now, and more people are coming into it, and like
They're following those God Emperor Trump memes into it.
oh my God,
Yeah.
ugh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And isn't the God Emperor supposed to be a bad guy?
Everyone's supposed to be a bad guy. That's like the thing. That's the thing that like people don't get about that franchise is that you're not supposed to want to be anyone in that franchise. Like the good guys are genocidal maniacs,
Right.
But like like the gaming store guy, who's just with his little white dudes and it's their little corner of the world. When it starts changing and starts becoming broader and other people start coming in, they lose control over that little community.
Yeah.
And reactionary rhetoric becomes super appealing to people like that.
Yeah. I also think like a lot of the problems of the alt-right, like largely the cause of the alt-right seems to be a failure to, I guess, understand like historical materialism, I guess you could say, where like I think a lot of what they're recognizing is like, these reactionaries recognize like the decay of our culture that's happening. And they react to that by saying, culture is decaying, but it's because of the Jews, and what we need to do is like cling to the old way of things to get our culture back, when the proper analysis is culture is collapsing because it's tied to the economic base, which is fundamentally collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, and the only solution is to move to a new mode of production and a new social order. But they fail to recognize that, and they think in this fundamentally reactionary way where they can just go back in time and, have their little, 1950s Coca-Cola advertisement lifestyle, like,
which never really existed.
Forever. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I would temper that a little bit with Adorno. I'd highly encourage you, if you haven't already, to pick up Dialectic of Enlightenment. Great book.
Nerd.
Yeah. Oh God, totally, man. Like if it's not depressing and continental, I'm not picking it up. But he's talked specifically about the capitalization of culture and industrial culture, and how capitalism will decay culture over time. His biggest gripe was with Disney back in like the 50s and 60s, and he passed away, but it's gotten even more crazy than what he wrote about in Dialectic of Enlightenment and Negative Dialectic too. And that's a very important philosophical standpoint to understand when you're living in a culture that has a completely capitalized culture industry and completely capitalized transmission of culture.
Yeah, you people are going to make me have to start reading a bunch of dry Marxists. This is going to kill me, but
Adorno, like I don't know if you could really call him so much of a Marxist as a classicist. Although he does use a little bit of a Marxian lens, because he's one of those dreaded postmodernists from the Frankfurt School.
The Frankfurt School. This was the weirdest thing also with the Frankfurt School, because like, okay, so Mouthy, you were probably too young for Occupy when it happened, I assume, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was at Occupy. That's where Caleb and I met each other, and where I became an anarchist just before Occupy, and then was like, oh, a bunch of liberals are protesting. It seems like it's not going away. Better get down there with my anarchy stuff and be the one anarchist. And then I get there and I'm like, oh, they're all anarchists.
No, I mean, throw a rock and you hit 6 copies of Conquest of Bread.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess I was going somewhere with that, and I don't know where. So my train of thought just utterly crashed. I guess what I want to ask is Mouthy, how did you come to more radical leftist ideas? Were you just reading stuff, or what happened with your sort of journey?
Yeah, well, I've always been into politics since I was really, really young. Like, if you look hard enough, you can probably find videos of 12-year-old me on YouTube talking about the Iraq war and shit. But
cool.
yeah, but I've always been into politics for most of my life, though. When I was first into politics, I was a sock dem, like a liberal.
Mm-hmm.
But sort of, I focused a lot on economic policy because I enjoyed talking about it. And the more I sort of analyzed economic policy and thought about economics, the more I realized okay, well, the core of my advocacy when it comes to my the economic policy that I advocate for is I'm basically trying to think up like 100 different policies that will, sort of mitigate the countless negative externalities which is breeded by the capitalist system. And at a certain point, I just came to the conclusion, like, this is a system which is fundamentally unstable, which creates all these negative externalities to such an extent that, like, trying to cover them all up is just like it's a non-starter. And like the only way to really address these harms that I've been trying to mitigate all this time is to, topple the system as a whole. And that's when I started, reading I started off like watching a bunch of Richard Wolff lectures on YouTube, and then I started, reading Marx and stuff, and that's sort of how it went.
Okay. What about you, Bobby?
Well, I grew up in very liberal areas. Actually, I had a lot of Republican grade school teachers, which is really weird. So, I started off as a little kid. I read like Tom Clancy, and I thought conservatives were always right when I was like 6. And then I turned like 10, and I started realizing how fucked up the system was. Mm-hmm. And I read Communist Manifesto when I was like 13. And I had my embarrassing tanky phase until I was like 14 or 15. and then you start realizing like, oh, well, shit, that didn't work. But you realize intrinsically, as you consume a lot of art, that the capitalist is never really the hero of the story. So that kind of helped me out a lot. And I started drifting towards the left. I started reading, The Conquest of Bread. I started reading Steiner. I started reading a lot of literature and philosophy. And I objectively, I'm probably towards the SOCDEM phase right now, because I think common ownership and an anarchist utopia would be the great goal of any political project. Right now, I think we kind of have to focus on achievable goals, and SOCDEM is probably the best way to do that right now.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah, serving overseas too, you see very, very unhealthy systems because the U.S. Army doesn't usually deploy you to a very nice place with a beach. So you see hard right-wing societies in the Middle East. Afghanistan is the one I mentioned earlier, that just don't work for the people. And you realize that the answer isn't on the anarchist right, ANCAP right, or it's definitely not on the authoritarian right. You just, through life experience, I've just drifted to the left, I guess, is the answer to your question without going off on like a 3-hour tangent.
That's really interesting. Maybe sometime you should debate on Sargon, because he did go into his like the Middle East as a savage area. That might be
that actually really annoyed me, because one, he painted the entire Middle East as a cultural monolith, and while Islam is a common thread throughout the what we would call, I guess, the Islamic world, tell a Saudi and an Iranian that they're the same culture, and tell me how that goes for you, or tell me, or tell a Shia Iraqi and a Sunni Iraqi that they're the exact same culture, and tell me how that goes for you. And they're not all just savages waiting in the wings with their knives. They're materially immiserated people living under hard right authoritarian systems in most cases, that are struggling to build functioning societies after centuries of colonial imposition, the effects of brutal empire. So that's just a really annoying thing that people do on the right, to me.
Yeah, no, I totally get you, and I wish I could have pushed a little harder on that, because I don't have a lot of knowledge about that part of the world.
It wasn't the topic of the debate, but still, it's just worth noting. Like people over there use arguments like that are made in what we call the West, I guess, to literally recruit terrorists and insurgents that kill American soldiers. So that's something that really, really annoys me. They literally were playing Trump speeches to ISIS recruits, just unedited.
Oh man, that's I was not aware of that, but of course that's happening. Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If you're a teenager in, say, like Syria, and the shrapnel that blew up your house is labeled Boeing, and then they play the Trump speech saying that we got to go secure the oil, what are you going to do?
I'm reminded as to why, like, a lot of jihadists like Star Wars and really identify with Luke.
Yeah. I mean, everyone does. It's a pretty basic story. Have you ever seen Turkish Star Wars, though?
I have. It's amazing.
It is amazing.
You seen this, Mouthy?
No, I've not seen
Oh,
Turkish Star Wars.
You need to YouTube that like as soon as possible.
All right, I'll check it out. Yeah.
It's hilarious. Okay, so we've been at this for a little while, so I'm going to let you guys go. Thank you all so much for watching the debate and for coming on to do this with me, especially on very short notice. I really appreciate it. I like to think that there are leftists out there, and we can do things other than savage each other. So, thank you.
What do you mean you didn't read page 458 of Capital?
I always remember what Malcolm X said, which is, "Don't be in such a hurry to condemn someone who doesn't think the way you think, because there was a time when you didn't know what you know today." So,
Right.
yeah, this has been cool. I'd love to stream with you guys again. And do you all have anything coming up that you want to plug? Mouthy, do you have a debate or anything on the horizon?
Well, theoretically, there's a debate with Sargon that I'm going to ask James about. But other than that, no, I don't have anything planned. Currently, my computer is broken, so I can't really do anything. But yeah.
Okay. Well, if you've got a Patreon, can we send people over there to get you a new computer?
Well, I very soon I'm going to make a Patreon so that I can, fix my computer. Maybe get internet that I can stream with. But yeah, I haven't made it yet because I'm lazy, but yeah.
That's cool. I have a Patreon, but I haven't done much with it. I have a couple of I made it, and a couple of people gave to it. And then I decided what I would rather do is focus on the Kickstarters for my comic book, and I don't want to pull from that. So it exists if anybody wants to Patreon me, but I will eventually try to move it into something bigger. I'd much rather people fund Snow White Zombies, at least until the series is done. Okay, Bobby, what about you?
So we do a weekly episode. Maybe you'll do one with me this week before I do a record with my normal co-host Rocco on Friday. I'm Mustache Bob on Twitter. My co-host is Space Rocco 2, SPACE Rocco 2 on Twitter. We're a 5x5 podcast on SoundCloud and Facebook. You can follow us there and suggest articles. We don't have a Patreon. We're not monetized yet because we don't put out content regularly enough. But I do want to plug one thing real quick. There have been 5 murders discovered on Fort Hood in the last month. One was a female soldier who was sexually assaulted by the NCO that wound up murdering her with a hammer in an armory on Fort Hood. Take a minute, find out about this stuff that I'm talking about right now, because you can Google it pretty easy, and write your congressman, because there needs to be investigations and accountability for that.
Yeah, that is terrifying. Thank you so much for telling me about it.
Yeah, she's not the only one. There was another soldier who was murdered and buried and declared a deserter, and they denied his family veterans benefits. So write your congress people, because there's something really bad going on at the biggest army base in the continental United States.
Absolutely. And before we hang up, Mouthy, you want to plug your pluggables, like your Twitter or anything?
Oh yeah, my Twitter is @Mouthy Infidel, and then my YouTube is Mouthy Infidel. That's pretty much all I have. So.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, I'll link that. Guys, send me any links you want me to put up when I upload this video, and you all should get the video as well, so you can upload it at your leisure. But if you need anything, you can get it from me. All right, we are signing off until the next debate. This was a blast, and thank you all very much.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Out.